Your brain talks to you roughly 6,000 times a day. And according to research from the National Science Foundation, about 80% of those thoughts are negative. That means somewhere around 5,000 times between waking up and falling asleep, your own mind is working against you. The thank you technique is one of the simplest ways to interrupt that pattern, and most people who hear about it dismiss it before ever trying it. The concept is almost suspiciously simple. When a negative thought enters your mind, you replace it with the words thank you. That's the entire mechanism. 2 words. But the reason it works has nothing to do with gratitude journals or positive affirmations or any of the things you're probably associating it with right now. The mechanism is cognitive interruption, and it exploits a quirk in how your brain processes language. Your mind can only hold one conscious verbal thought at a time. Try it right now. Try thinking the sentence, "I'm not good enough," and the words "thank you" simultaneously. You can't. One pushes the other out. This is the same principle behind cognitive diffusion techniques used in acceptance and commitment therapy, developed by psychologist Stephen Hayes in the 1980s. The goal is to break the automatic chain between a thought appearing and you believing it, acting on it, or spiraling deeper into it. Most people assume they need to argue with negative thoughts. Challenge them, build a case for why the thought is wrong. And sometimes that works. But sometimes you're tired. Sometimes you're at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling, and you don't have the energy to cross-examine your own brain like a defense attorney. The thank you technique requires zero intellectual effort. It's a pattern interrupt that works precisely because it's so small. So why thank you specifically? Why those 2 words instead of, say, stop, or cancel, or next thought? The answer comes down to emotional tone. When you say stop to your own mind, you're creating an adversarial relationship with your thoughts. You're fighting them. And fighting thoughts is like fighting quicksand. The resistance makes you sink faster. Thank you does something different. It acknowledges the thought without engaging with it. It treats the thought like a notification you've read, but chosen to dismiss. Your brain flagged something. You received the message. Thank you. Moving on. Researchers at the University of Toronto found that people who practice acceptance-based thought strategies showed measurably lower activity in brain regions associated with rumination compared to those who tried suppression. Trying to push thoughts away, the stop approach actually increases their frequency. Psychologists call this the ironic process theory. Tell yourself to stop thinking about a white bear, and you'll think about white bears all afternoon. Daniel Wegner documented this effect in the 1980s, and it's been replicated dozens of times since. Thank you sidesteps the trap entirely. You're acknowledging the thought's existence, which satisfies the part of your brain that generated it, while simultaneously replacing the content with something neutral. The thought doesn't bounce back harder because you never told it to leave. You just moved on. Now, the skeptics have a fair point here. Saying thank you to a thought like you're going to fail, or nobody actually likes you, sounds absurd. It sounds like putting a band-aid on a broken bone. And if the technique stopped at just saying 2 words, they'd be right. The power is in what happens with repetition over days and weeks. Every time you use the replacement, you're training a new default response. Your brain runs on pattern recognition. When a negative thought fires and is consistently met with the same neutral interruption, the neural pathway weakens. Cognitive behavioral researchers describe this as extinction, the same principle behind exposure therapy. A stimulus that once triggered a strong response gradually loses its charge when the expected reaction stops showing up. The thought still arrives, but it arrives quieter. It stays for a shorter window. Eventually, some thoughts stop coming altogether. Think about the last time you drove a familiar route and arrived without remembering most of the turns. That's automaticity. Your brain consolidated the pattern so deeply that conscious attention became unnecessary. The thank you technique aims for the same thing, making the interruption so automatic that negative thought spirals get cut off before they build momentum. The first 2 weeks feel ridiculous. You're saying thank you 40, 50 times a day, and nothing seems different. Week 3 is where people typically report the first shift. The thoughts still come, but the emotional weight behind them starts to thin. One detail most people miss: the technique works best when applied to repetitive thoughts, the ones that show up on a loop. That inner voice telling you the same story about your inadequacy for the 3rd time today. Those loops are where most psychological damage accumulates, because each repetition strengthens the neural pathway and deepens the emotional groove. A novel worry, "Did I leave the stove on?" resolves itself naturally. The loops are the ones that need active disruption. The application looks different depending on the context. During the day, when a familiar negative thought surfaces, you internally say thank you and redirect attention to whatever you were doing. The redirection matters. The technique creates a gap, but you need to fill it. Without something to move your attention toward, the original thought slides right back into the vacancy. At night, when rumination tends to peak and you don't have tasks to redirect toward, the technique pairs well with body-based attention shifts. Say thank you, then move your focus to the sensation of the pillow against your skin. The physical anchor gives your brain somewhere to land. There's a version of this that therapists sometimes call thanking the mind. You extend it slightly. "Thank you, mind, for trying to protect me." This framing reframes the entire relationship with negative thinking. Instead of treating your anxious or critical thoughts as enemies, you treat them as an overzealous security system. The alarm is going off because the system is doing its job. It detected something it categorized as a threat. You can acknowledge the alarm and still choose to stay in the room. That reframe alone changes the emotional texture of the experience, from "something is wrong with me" to "my protection system is running." A common mistake is trying to use the technique for every single negative thought from day one. That's like trying to run a marathon during your first week of jogging. Start with one category. Pick the thought that loops most frequently, the one you'd recognize from a mile away because it's visited you so many times. Use the technique exclusively for that thought for 2 weeks. Once you notice the pattern weakening, expand to the next most frequent loop. This graduated approach prevents the fatigue that makes people abandon the practice entirely. The other mistake is performing the technique with gritted teeth. "Thank you," said with internal rage, carries the same adversarial energy as "stop." The tone matters even when it's silent. Aim for the emotional register of thanking a waiter who just refilled your water. Pleasant, brief, forgettable. The mundaneness is the point. Some practitioners combine the technique with physical micro-gestures, a slight nod when they say thank you internally, a soft exhale. These small physical signals recruit the body into the process, which strengthens the interruption. Your body and your verbal mind are now coordinating on the same message: received, acknowledged, released. Critics of thought replacement techniques argue that they bypass the deeper work, that you should be examining why the thought exists, what wound it points to, what unmet need it signals. And that work matters. Therapy matters. Self-examination matters. The thank you technique was never designed to replace that deeper excavation. It handles the surface turbulence, so you can function while doing the slower, harder work underneath. A surgeon doesn't stop the bleeding because stopping blood is the cure. Stopping the bleeding keeps the patient alive long enough for the surgery to work. After a few months of consistent practice, something strange happens. The gap between a negative thought arriving and the replacement firing shrinks to almost nothing. The thought barely finishes forming before thank you overwrites it. People describe feeling like they've installed a filter. The thoughts still generate, but they dissolve before reaching emotional depth. The mental chatter doesn't disappear, it just loses its authority. And that's the real shift. The volume of negative thoughts might decrease by 30 or 40% over time, but the thoughts that remain lose their grip. They become background noise instead of commands. You stop obeying every anxious prediction your brain generates. You hear it, you acknowledge it, and you keep walking. The same mechanism that made those thoughts powerful in the first place, repetition, becomes the tool that disarms them. Every thank you is a vote for a quieter mind, cast so many times that the tally eventually tips.